If you're lucky, perhaps your Power Automate flows run successfully out of the box 9 times out of 10. But what about those times when things don't go quite right and you have unexpected failure in your flow? Now, we can all debug flows. We can put composers into our flows to see what data is going through them, fix the problems on the fly. But what about some techniques to defensively set up our Power Automate flows to make sure that when they do error, things are handled elegantly? In this video, I'm going to show you 3 specific techniques that are going to help you out of most situations and hopefully explain a little bit about why we implement them and where they work well and where they don't. Enjoy. Now on screen is a bit of a Frankenstein flow. I've set this up purely to demonstrate some concepts and ideas that are going to help you in trapping problems that regularly occur after you've successfully set up and configured your flow. So this video is not about how to debug flows as you're building them particularly, but about dealing with common errors that happen when your flow should run but encounters unexpected errors. So first of all, we might have a flow. This one's just a manually triggered flow, but you might run a child flow. This might be an approval that you send off. Sometimes things take longer than expected. Maybe what you don't want is your flow overall timing out because a child flow has timed out, or maybe an approval has taken too long. So the first option I'm going to share with you is that if you have a flow action like this, you could also have a secondary action which is a fallback should this timeout take place. Now this particular child flow setup has a deliberate wait for 10 seconds before it responds. And what I've done here on this action, just to simulate a problem, is I've set a timeout of 2 seconds. You can set timeouts on a number of different actions in case you don't want to wait, but this is just to prove an error and then show you the principle. So if you're doing this, make sure you set the ISO 8601 format. This just means the amount of time is seconds and it's 2 of them. So wait 2 seconds. So we know this is going to fail. The timeout is 2 seconds. The flow itself will take a minimum of 10 seconds. But what I've then done is just set a secondary action. I've just added it below this first action. And in the settings here, we've configured run after. And you'll notice the little dots we have here. These are the conditions that this action will run. So if the action prior to it, called the runner child flow, has timed out, this action will run. You can select different actions and you can select different conditions, and you can select more than one condition. But here I've said, if we get a timeout message from that action, perform this action. Houston, we've had a problem. And you'll make sure that your flow can continue elegantly rather than just fall over. Let me test that and show you what that looks like. Now, we're going to see a slightly different circumstance here. We'll count 2 seconds and then I'm expecting this action to skip and this action to fire. So this timed out, it's told me that. But what you'll notice here is it is then run this action here. We've got that output, Houston, we had a problem. Now, ignore the fact this flow run failed. That's because of a different reason. If none of these actions were here, we would have had a successful flow outcome. Now, let me show you why that is. The idea of what we've just done there is we've elegantly captured a problem in an action that takes place further up our flow. The reason we got the error there is we haven't elegantly captured the problem that happens here. So I've got an HTTP call, another common kind of action that you might have in your flows where you're going out to maybe the Graph API or maybe you're going to a third-party service. But here, once again, I've configured it to fail. So this call here deliberately goes to that URL and it waits. And what I've also done, I think, is set a timeout. So the action is going to wait, but the timeout is going to fire. Now, the reason the flow failed is because when this action times out, nothing catches it. So our flow falls over. Now, if we don't want that, as I showed you earlier, we can add different run after actions into the same action there. So I can add that HTTP call and say, okay, not only the previous one needs to have timed out, but if this one's timed out, let's also catch the error. Now, in this case, I don't expect the flow to fail because we've just effectively given it somewhere to go in that failure condition. So here we can see the flow is running. This is going to time out at the same time as this one. They've both just timed out. You'll notice the flow did run successfully this time. That's because we've handled the problems. Now, of course, you wouldn't fire both of those into the same error message, the same bucket to deal with. You'd have separate error handling, maybe different composes. Maybe you do a Teams call, maybe you do a meet it, maybe you do an email for each of them to say, look, the HTTP call has had a problem, please go look at it, or please come and see this flow. Lots of things you can do there. But the principle is what I want to share in this video of catching the problems and dealing with them more elegantly using that run after. Now, before we move to the third leg, there's something else I want to share with you. If you've ever opened up the settings on an action, you may have noticed in networking, sometimes you will see this retry policy. Generally, there's nothing set in there, but I've set this one very specifically to show some of the strengths and weaknesses of what you can do here as well. So the principle is, if something times out, retry it. Retry it 3 times in this case, and retry it every 10 seconds. That's what I'd like this to do. The slight challenge is, although we're offered that with a child flow, when it comes to child flow specifically, retries don't work in the same way. So we can't exploit that fallback there and try it again. However, we can try it again with this HTTP call. So again, with this particular one in networking, we've set a fixed interval. You have a few different options here, but I've just chosen fixed interval. And I've said retry twice. And every 5 seconds, give it a go. So I'll just show you what that looks like if you set that up. But what that could potentially do is it may fail the first time, but actually the second time in that HTTP call might work. So when it comes to that kind of action, instead of getting an error, that might actually recover your flow for you. But as I say, that wouldn't recover your flow for you with a child flow. You definitely want to have some elegant error handling there. Let's give this a run and I'll show you what it looks like. So we see that's timed out. It's not even tried to retry the flow here. Here, I'm guessing because it's taken 5 seconds, it's most likely tried to rerun the flow. So let's just have a look. And here we can see the difference. Retries occurred. We can then see in that classic way each of the different retries, what it tried to do, when it tried to do it. But we've got that intelligent attempt to recover. And then when it couldn't do it on the second time, it's obviously dropped down to the error message, which is what we want. So back into the flow for the third thing that you can implement, and it's called a scope. You may have seen these, they're this lovely brown colour. You may not have seen the idea of try, catch, and finally. This isn't something that's native to Power Automate, but it's something that's been inherited from development practice. And it's the idea of trying to do something. In the event there is a problem, we will catch any problems and we'll perform some other actions. And then finally, we've got something we're going to do anyway in all circumstances. And we're just really leveraging the benefit of the scope action here because it encapsulates a number of different actions. So what we're really saying here is I've got a group of things I want to do. If any or more of them encounter problems, treat that as a whole, and then the scope will effectively inherit the problem and pass it off to another group of actions. One thing you can't do with scopes specifically is control them in the same way as actions. We don't have retry policies, we don't have timeouts. They inherit the retry and the timeouts of the actions within them. So all I've done here is I've stored some data. I've then done that pretend call again and again. I've given it a timeout which is less than the amount of time that call should theoretically take. So this would in effect time out. But what will actually happen here is because this is a timeout, the Power Automate will treat this as a failure in the whole of this group and pass a failure to the scope. And it's there that this catch will take action, and we can see the run after being configured. I've configured it to say if the try times out or has failed. In reality, we're going to see that this is a failure. And if that's the case, we'll write an error message, and it may be we call out to Teams or send an email. And the last piece we have down here is this finally. I've actually configured it to run if the catch is successful, but arguably you might say, well, let's also say if the run has been successful. So if we've either had an error or we've successfully gone through, in any case, we're always going to do this bunch of actions down here. You may or may not have that, but certainly try and catch is a very common pattern you'll see in Power Automate. So let's just give that a test and see how that performs. So we see our try is taking place. It's going to try and call that HTTP. It's going to time out, I hope. It's timed out there. And there you go. It's performed an error after 4 seconds. Because of that, the catch has woken up. It said, okay, I'll write a message. I could do some things. And interestingly, it hasn't run the finally leg. Let me just double check that. I think I know why that is. I think that's because what we've actually got here is an and. So if they are both successful, which is kind of not what we want. So we probably just need to change that ever so slightly. If the try has failed or is successful, or the catch is successful or is skipped. Let's just give that a whirl. And there we go. I think arguably in my logic, I may not always have a finally. I would most likely have my actions under a try, maybe some branching going on there, and then catch if there's a problem. But hey, look, that's another option that you could try. So for now, that's all I've got to share with you on Power Automate errors. I hope that's been useful to you. Do ask any questions in the comments. I'm really happy to dig into further questions and further insights around this area. But don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.